Hello and welcome to From Impossible to Inevitable. I am your host, Megan Bauer. Thank you so much for joining me today and pushing play on today's episode. This is episode 108, and today we are talking about definitions. This is something that's actually been on my mind quite a bit, is definitions. I have a 5-year-old and she is very, very curious, and of course, she wants to know, what's this? What's that? How is this different from that? And we get into definitions a lot. And it's interesting when she asks a question on what something means and we can't quite describe it because we just know what it means. We aren't in the habit of describing or, really giving the definition of things. So it's really interesting. But anyways, definitions have been on my mind. Definitions are hugely helpful, right? They tell us what something is and what it's not. They tell us what something does and what it doesn't do. If I were to tell you that I have a dog and then I show you a picture of a bird, you would wonder if I knew what a dog was, because a bird is so obviously not a dog. They are very different animals, and that's part of their definition, right? Dogs do not have wings. Dogs do not have feathers. Dogs do not have beaks. Dogs do not fly. All of these things. Dogs have 4 legs. Dogs have, fur. But these definitions are hugely helpful, right? And within definitions, of course, there are some outliers. There are some things that don't fall into that exact definition. We would say part of the definition of a dog would be that they have 4 legs, right? But there are 3-legged dogs. Part of a definition of a dog would be that it has fur. But there are dogs that have skin conditions that makes them lose their fur. So they are hairless dogs. They're furless dogs, right? But that doesn't make them less of a dog. It just makes them a different kind of dog, right? A different thing. And then of course within dogs, the whole species or whatever of dogs, there are all of the different kinds of dogs. You wouldn't say necessarily, if I said I had a dog, and then you aren't necessarily thinking of my exact 60-pound German Shepherd, right? You are thinking of whatever dog has been most influential in your life, or whatever dog you like the most, or maybe you have a dog so you think of your dog. You don't necessarily think of my dog, but you know what I'm talking about when I say I have a dog. You've got an idea of what I am talking about. So really, Megan, get to the point. Why are we talking about dogs and the definitions of dogs? The interesting thing here is that we have definitions for ourselves. And this might be something that we don't even realize we have. This might be something that we don't even realize we are operating under, but that doesn't make it less true. It doesn't make it less there. We have these definitions of ourselves, and it influences how we behave. It influences how we show up. It influences what we do. It influences what we say. It influences where we go, who we hang out with, the types of things that we spend our time on, our energy on, our money on. We have these definitions of ourselves. And of course, 2 people can have the same definition of themselves and then still behave in very different ways, or still do things very differently, because they are embodying that definition in different ways. And that doesn't make either one wrong or bad or whatever. They're just different, right? You would never look at a 3-legged dog and be like, you're a bad dog because you don't have 4 legs. That's not the case. So we can adopt these definitions. We often adopt them on accident, to be honest. We don't necessarily create these definitions deliberately, but you can. That's the cool, powerful thing, is that you can. We often create them on accident. Maybe we are late to an event or late to events, and it happens so much and so often that we just adopt this, I am late. Or maybe you feel like you don't ever have it together And so you adopt the phrase, this identity, this definition of yourself that you just never have it together because it's happened before. And then you just take on that definition. That's mostly how it happens. Honestly, that's how, like, we experience something in our lives and then we just take on that definition and then we just embody it. And we embody it even when it doesn't have to be the case, even when we can choose differently. It's that, like, no matter what I do, I'm late kind of idea where there's that, I don't know if you've heard a story like this, I have, where, they have this definition of themselves that they are late to everything. And then one day they are incredibly, running early. And they're like, wow, I'm ready and I've got like 10 minutes to spare and whatever. And then they leave. They're like, this is going to be amazing. I'm going to be early. And then they realize, oh, I left my phone and now I've got to go back and get it. And, and then when I go back in, I realize that I forgot to answer this email. So then I hop on my phone real quick to answer this email. And then all of a sudden they're late, right? Like initially they were doing great. And then this series of events fell into place to make them late. So these things happen. They do. We get to define ourselves. If I am, like, if you've listened to the podcast for any amount of time, I am not late. I am really very rarely ever late. And in the event that I was going somewhere and I realized that I left my phone, I realized I left whatever, if it's not critical, I will probably continue on rather than be late, rather than make that choice and go back and get it. It depends on what it is, obviously. If I'm going somewhere and I absolutely need the one thing, of course, I would do that. But being late is not the norm for me. It's not the normal. It is the random three-legged dog sort of situation. So how do we figure out what are even these definitions that we're living by that maybe we don't even notice that we're living by? First, you just have to slow down enough to notice what comes out of your mouth and the thoughts you think about yourself. So I would never say anything like, I'm a hot mess express or I'm a chaos coordinator, because I never want those things to stick about me. I never want to adopt that definition or that identity of being a hot mess express or a chaos coordinator. They're very funny, but they're funny until you feel like they're true, until you feel like that's how you live. Then it's not so funny anymore, because who really likes to be a hot mess? Who really likes to be a coordinator of the chaos, right? Like, who really likes that in their life? Who likes the mess in their life? Who likes the chaos? No one. It's a really funny thing until it feels true. So those are things I would never say. Those are sweatshirts that I would never wear with those sayings, because I never want them to stick. But it happens like that. It really does. It happens like that. So notice the things that you think. Notice the things that fall out of your mouth. Like the things that I think that are unflattering about myself that I, work on changing are things like, I screwed that up again, or that wasn't good enough. It's never good enough. The good enough thing has really been hitting lately. So that's one that I'm actively working on changing, because I have just always, the last few months, that's what it's felt like over here for me, is it felt like it's not good enough. It's not good enough. I'm not good enough, blah, blah, blah. Those are the definitions about myself that I'm working on, that I'm actively trying to change. So these things sometimes you have definitions. We all have definitions that we love, right? Like, we really do. I don't want you to think this is all about negative, blah, blah, because you do have definitions about yourself that you want to keep, that you want to cultivate, that you want to apply to you, that you are so happy apply to you. Notice those too. Notice those too. Give yourself a pat on the back and be like, yes, these definitions about myself are awesome. I love them. I want to keep them. I want to keep cultivating them. I want them to continue to be true for me forever. But there are also things about yourself, these definitions that you hold about yourself, that you probably want to change, especially if you've never looked at your behavior in this sort of light, if you've never looked at how you show up to things, how you portray yourself, if you've never looked at it as in this light of somebody like me does these things, then there probably are things that you don't like that you do that are attached to a definition that you carry about yourself. And the thing is that we'll always create these situations to prove our definitions about ourselves are true. No matter if they're positive definitions that you want to keep forever or they're negative definitions that you want to change, we'll always gravitate towards these situations where these things are true about us, because that is what we expect. That is what we are creating, if you will. So notice these definitions. You notice the definitions you love and want to continue applying to you, and notice the ones that you don't like so much. Notice the ones that you want to change, and the ones that you want to change for yourself. What would you like to be true for you instead? If you got to choose your definition, which you do, what would you choose instead? So going back to this repeat mantra of mine of it's not good enough, it's never good enough, I'm not good enough. My obvious, it's usually the opposite, let's be honest. It usually is, but it doesn't have to be. Mine would be, it's good enough. I'm good enough, my work is good enough, the podcast is good enough, what I've done today is good enough, dinner is good enough, blah, blah, whatever. And I could even take it one step further and be like, it's beyond good enough. I am beyond good enough. And good enough, of course, is subjective, right? Like my good enough on the podcast was different when I first started than my good enough on the podcast is now. And that's great that it grows with me. My standard can evolve and change and improve and increase, and yours can too. So it's not that we're not aiming for perfection, right? Like, of course, there are going to be podcast episodes that I record that maybe weren't that great. Maybe they didn't land. Maybe I didn't convey my ideas in a succinct, easy to understand, clear way. I'm going to have the misses, right? There's always going to be the three-legged dogs. We love those three-legged dogs. They're so cute and we feel so bad for them, but go, you three-legged dog, go. And we're always going to have the three-legged dogs, okay? This is not about perfection. It's about what you want to be true for you the vast majority of the time. So as you create these new definitions, know that you are going to feel like you're falling short of those new definitions until you have totally embodied them, until you notice that that is true for you more often than not. This is a habit thing. And I feel like instilling habits, like thought patterns and behavior patterns like this, where you're changing your definition of yourself, you're changing your identity of yourself, these I feel like are the trickiest to really fully establish. Because this isn't a checkbox thing. This is a who you are thing. And because that's so tricky, it's going to take time. However, as you instill these definitions of yourself, the behaviors of what you want to actually do those will follow easier, because the hardest part is actually redefining yourself. As I started my morning ritual, I was very intentionally stepping into the definition of an early morning riser. And that was hard because I have always loved to sleep in. I love sleeping when the sun is up, most particularly. I've always really loved that. That has been part of my identity, part of my definition of who I am for so, so long. And even the other day, I saw my dad and I told him, I was like, I'm almost to 200 days on my 5 a.m. ritual. And he goes, who even are you? Right? Like, and he said it with love. He said it jokingly, but that is what I'm saying. I've changed this definition of myself, and it didn't take 200 days to do it. Now it's just normal. Now it's just part of who I am. Now it's just part of my definition, part of my identity. But I think it took 60 to 70-ish days for me to really establish this early morning habit. this early morning ritual. And in conjunction with that, if you've listened to my early morning ritual or routine episode, I started exercising every single day. So now that is part of my definition too, that I get up early and I exercise. That's part of who I am. That's part of my life. That's normal. But it didn't start that way. It wasn't always that way. The behavior, now the actions are so much easier because part of my definition is that this is just what I do. This is just who I am. This is just part of normal life. Okay. So if you aren't sure what you want to step into, if you aren't sure what you want your definitions to actually be, if the opposite of whatever you don't want doesn't feel like it fits quite, look around at the people you admire, the people who live life like you want to live, the people who do things like you want to do, and ask yourself, this is a guess, but you don't need to know exactly what it is for them because you're searching for what it is for you. Ask yourself, what definitions might they hold about themselves? What might be a part of their identity? What could be going on kind of behind the scenes that is then fueling this behavior, that is then fueling these actions, that is then fueling these results even? And ask yourself about that. Ponder on that. Like, what is true for these people? These people that I admire, these people that I really look up to, these people that have the life, family, business, whatever that I want to have, what are the definitions that they are living by? And like I said, you don't have to know for sure because it doesn't matter. You're looking for what makes an impact to you. You're looking for what will shift things for you. And here's the thing about these definitions, right? You can try them, and if you decide, you know what, I really don't like this, you can change them. They're totally changeable. If I decided one day, you know what, I don't actually really like my morning ritual anymore, I can start sleeping in at any time, right? Like, I can make that choice. I can readopt my old definitions. I can readopt my old identities. Totally an option. Totally an option. So this isn't a life or death thing. This is a changing how you see yourself, changing your definition of yourself into one that you have chosen deliberately so that you can show up as your best self, so that you can do your best work, so that you can be the best version of you possible. Right? Right. Oh, that feels so good. Isn't that so exciting to just know that these things that maybe you think about yourself that have just kind of landed and stayed and have just you've adopted accidentally, you don't have to keep them. You don't have to keep them. You don't have to live by them. You can choose. You can choose deliberately what you want to live by, what your definitions of yourself that you live by. I love that. It's so powerful. It's so hugely powerful. And remember, what you choose to live by then informs the decisions that you make, then informs how you show up, then informs what you create, what you do, the results that you get, how you even your perspective on life, your perspective on yourself, your perspective on your relationships. It impacts all of these things. And you can choose that deliberately. That's what I have for you today. Thank you so much for joining me today on episode 128. I appreciate you. I send you my love. Until next time, bye for now.